evening, ladies and gentlemen. Or, as my father used to say, Guten Nacht. Guten Nacht. I was born in the old country in Bavaria, near Munich, a very long time ago. It was 1847, they tell me, but I don't remember it much. It didn't take my father long to decide that life in America, even for a foreigner, would be a far sight better than in Germany, so we immigrated across the Atlantic Ocean on the Matoga, which must have left a favorable impression on me because I spent pretty near the rest of my life on boats. We arrived at Ellis Island in June of 1850. I was 3 years old. Made our way to Louisville, Kentucky, where many other German and Irish immigrants had settled. And we stuck it out for 5 years. Saw many amazing and many awful things. The final straw occurred on Monday, August the 6th, 1855. It was an election day. Now, the party in power, they called themselves the Know-Nothings. They were an offshoot of the old Whig Party. They were the native, predominantly Protestant, entrenched power. And they saw us as a threat because we identified more with the Democrat Party. We were Catholic. And we made up about 1/3 of the city's population. Now, that Monday in August became known as Bloody Monday. Oh, our folks were met at the polls by armed mobs who used every means to prevent our votes from being cast. And our people fought back. Oh, there was rioting like I'd never seen before. They burned down a whole section of housing called Quinn's Row, where many of those poor Irish lived. Nobody knows how many people died that day. Some say 22, but our folks estimate upwards of 100, mostly immigrants, lost their lives. Regardless of the number, it didn't pay to be an immigrant in Louisville. Well, my father, he saw the writing on the wall. He gathered us all to get out of there for our own safety, and over 10,000 German and Irish immigrants would eventually do the same thing. We jumped on a riverboat headed to New Orleans, but we got waylaid by fog right here in Owensboro. Some folks my father spoke with sold him on the idea of staying here. It was a great place to live and was far enough from Louisville to be safe. So at the age of 8, I had finally found my home, and though I left her many times in my travels, I always came back to her. I taught myself to play the drum in Owensboro, and that came in mighty handy. You see, those were anxious times. There was a fear building in our country that war would come to us, and it did. Well, I was clamoring to sign up. I was on the side of the Confederacy, as many of us were, but I was only 14 years old, and the only thing they could use me for was as a drummer boy. Now, wasn't I a lucky son of a gun? I signed up with Captain Jack Thompson's Dixie Guards, and we left Owensboro in May of 1861 for New Orleans and eventually Richmond, Virginia. We were in the very first major battle of the Civil War at Manassas, Virginia, some folks call Bull Run. It was an awful, bloody affair, eventually counted as a Confederate victory, but it came at a high, high cost. Me and Willie Wallace and 2 others were the only survivors of the Dixie Guards. But I loved the Army life, and I wasn't ready to come home, so I enlisted in the Virginia 3rd Battery as a drummer. It wasn't long before my captain sent me to Louisville on an errand with papers to secure some much-needed quinine for our troops. Well, since I had to wait, I thought I'd jump on a riverboat and run downriver for a quick visit home, which was a fine idea in my 15-year-old way of thinking. But the minute I stepped foot in town, that dad-blamed provost marshal had me arrested and thrown into a military prison. It wasn't until General Forrest came to town that I was released. Oh, yes, eventually. They awarded me this Confederate Cross of Honor. I'm guessing it was because I survived the war. Well, sir, in 1869, I found myself a wife, Miss Martha Bame of this city, and we had us 11 children thanks to my shore leaves between runs. You see, those were restless times, And I was restless, just like our country after the war. I wanted to travel something fierce. So I got me a job as a deck sweep on a riverboat. And it was a fine job. Oh, I enjoyed running up and down that river. I did it for 30 years, mostly the packet line between Henderson and Louisville, but also the Mississippi and Point South. Oh, I sure did enjoy that. Did it for 30 years, and after the river, I did the Gulf of Mexico on steamers, running between Santo Domingo and Jacksonville. Yeah, those ship owners and pilots were making big money in those days. They made big money hauling valuable timber from Santo Domingo to the States. Now, early on, I left that deck sweeping job behind and I moved into the kitchen, where I learned that not only did I like to cook, I was darn good at it. From then on, I was the chief cook from steamers running every which way, from Central America to Washington to New Orleans. And my grub, it was the best on the river. After I retired, I came back to Owensboro and got myself a job as the chief cook at the Union Hotel on Frederica Street. People said I was the best around. I guess I was. Then I up and died at my son George's house in 1908. Oh, it was a surprise to everyone, especially me. Well, I'll tell you folks, I came a long way from Bavaria. I traveled many adventure-filled miles. And I'm telling you, I enjoyed every dad-blame minute of it. By the way, at this point, every other night till tonight, I've tipped my hat and walked off to thunderous applause. But tonight, I want to introduce someone to you. Actually, the reason why is I have a keen sense of family. And there is someone on this wagon tonight who is the great-great-grandson of John Frank Wecker. It's Eric Borgman. He came all the way from Boston, Massachusetts to hear his great-great-granddaddy's story. Eric, thanks for coming. Good night, y'all.
Thank you.